The cold weight of the scalpel rests between your fingers, balanced perfectly, catching the harsh glare of the surgical theater lights. Beneath the sterile drape lies a 7-year-old girl, her life hanging on the microscopic precision of your next movement. But as you look down at your hands, panic freezes the breath in your throat. These are not your hands. They are longer, older, scarred at the knuckles, and completely unfamiliar, just like the face you saw in the mirror less than an hour ago. You have no idea how to perform this surgery, yet a room full of medical professionals is watching you, waiting for the first incision, utterly unaware that the brilliant surgeon they trust is currently trapped inside the mind of a terrified stranger. To understand how you arrived at the edge of this abyss, you have to look back to the quiet, unremarkable life you left behind just yesterday. You were Arthur Vance, a man who spent his days in the dim, silent basement of the Metropolitan Museum, restoring ancient, crumbling artifacts. Your entire existence was defined by isolation, patience, and a hyper-focused discipline required to piece together shattered Roman glass or stabilize centuries-old manuscripts. It was a lonely life, deeply shadowed by the heavy debts left behind after your sister's long illness, a burden that kept you trapped in a cycle of exhausting work and sleepless nights. Your only real asset was your absolute control over your movements, a rare cognitive steadiness that allowed you to manipulate tools smaller than a needle without a single tremor. That steadiness was exactly what made you the perfect candidate for the specialized neurological study you signed up for, a clinical trial promising a significant financial payout that would finally clear your family's debts. The advertisement had detailed a simple, non-invasive mapping of deep brain motor control, a routine procedure to help synthesize neural networks for advanced prosthetics. You remember walking into the sleek, private research facility on the edge of the city, the sterile scent of rubbing alcohol, and the reassuring smile of the technician who secured the soft mesh cap over your head. You fell asleep to the rhythmic, low hum of the scanner, fully expecting to wake up in the same vinyl chair, collect your check, and return to your quiet basement sanctuary. Instead, you woke up to the sound of ocean waves crashing against a cliffside. Your eyes snapped open to reveal a massive, minimalist bedroom flooded with morning light, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking a private coastline. The sheets beneath you were heavy Egyptian cotton, and the air smelled faintly of expensive sandalwood and sea salt. For several seconds, you lay completely paralyzed, waiting for the dream to dissolve, but the sharp chill of the room was entirely too real. When you swung your legs out of the bed, your feet hit cold, polished concrete, and as you stood up, you realized your perspective was wrong. You were several inches taller, your center of gravity shifted forward, your limbs heavier and longer than they should be. Stumbling into the adjacent bathroom, you gripped the edges of a floating marble vanity and looked into the mirror. The face staring back at you was not Arthur Vance. It was the sharp, commanding countenance of Dr. Julian Vance, a world-renowned neurosurgeon whose face you had seen on medical billboards and tech magazine covers across the city. You touched your cheek, and the reflection mirrored the movement instantly, the older, weathered skin moving beneath your fingertips. A sudden, sharp chime interrupted your panic as the home's automated assistant spoke from a hidden speaker in the ceiling, calmly announcing that your transport to the surgical center would arrive in exactly 60 minutes. Chaos erupted in your mind as you rushed back into the bedroom, tearing through drawers to find a phone, a wallet, anything to explain the impossible reality. The biometric lock on the nightstand drawer opened instantly at the touch of your thumb, proving that the physical body you inhabited belonged entirely to Julian, even if the consciousness inside it was entirely your own. Inside the drawer, you found a personal tablet, its screen illuminating to show a single encrypted video file waiting on the home screen. With trembling hands, you pressed play.
The video revealed Julian himself sitting in the very same bedroom just hours earlier, looking exhausted, a deep, frantic desperation in his eyes. He looked directly into the camera, speaking to you, addressing you by your true name. He explained that the clinical trial you joined was never about mapping prosthetics. It was a highly illegal, privately funded neural architecture transfer designed to completely swap the cognitive identities of two compatible subjects. Julian had spent years searching for someone with your exact, flawless neural stability, a perfect match to overwrite his own failing system. The revelation turned your stomach to ice as Julian explained his motive. He was not fleeing his wealth or his prestige. He was fleeing a devastating hidden truth. He had recently developed a rare, aggressive, degenerative motor condition that caused microscopic, unpredictable tremors in his hands, a fatal flaw for a man whose entire legacy was built on performing impossible, high-stakes neurosurgeries. If the medical world found out, his career was over, his reputation ruined, and his massive financial empires would collapse under the weight of lawsuits. To save his legacy, he used his immense wealth to engineer a permanent escape. He used the machine to dump his compromised, diseased neural patterns into your body, leaving you to inherit his physical form, his identity, and the catastrophic crisis he was scheduled to face today. The video cut to black just as the bedroom intercom buzzed sharply, the voice of a private driver announcing that your vehicle had arrived downstairs to take you to the hospital. Your breath came in ragged, shallow gasps as you realized the full horror of the trap. You were completely isolated, locked inside a life that wasn't yours, with absolutely no proof of who you actually were. If you walked out to the vehicle and told the driver, the guards, or the hospital staff the truth, you would be immediately sedated, institutionalized, and dismissed as a man experiencing a severe psychotic break. Julian had covered his tracks perfectly, leaving no paper trail, no physical evidence, and no way to reverse the process. The sheer weight of his immense responsibility now pressed down on your chest, suffocating you with a profound sense of loneliness. The escalation tightened like a vice during the silent, tense drive to the medical center. The driver treated you with quiet, deferential respect, addressing you doctor, while you stared out the tinted window, watching the city blur past, your mind desperately searching for a loophole. When you arrived, the hospital staff moved with frantic efficiency, guiding you through private corridors directly toward the scrub rooms. A senior surgical nurse met you at the door, handing you a digital chart while briefing you on the urgency of the situation. The patient was a young girl who had suffered a massive traumatic injury to her cranial nerves. The window to restore her sight and stabilize her neurological functions was closing rapidly. The nurse emphasized that the procedure required an unprecedented level of microdissection near the brainstem, a delicate maneuver that only Julian's famous rock-steady hands could execute. The hospital had already delayed the surgery as long as possible, waiting for your arrival, and any further postponement would result in permanent, irreversible damage to the child. Standing at the scrub sink, the soapy water running over your unfamiliar hands, you reached the absolute lowest point of your existence. You felt entirely helpless, caught between two catastrophic choices. If you stepped into that room and confessed that you were an imposter, the surgery would be canceled, the girl would be permanently blinded, and you would spend the rest of your life locked away in a psychiatric ward. If you went through with it and attempted to mimic a genius surgeon, your lack of medical knowledge would almost certainly kill her on the table. Every option led to ruin, and there was no one coming to save you.
Then, as you stared at the water swirling down the drain, a sudden shift occurred in your perspective. You looked closely at the long fingers of Julian's hands. According to the video log, Julian's tremor was the result of a degenerative motor disease, a physical degradation of the neural pathways controlling fine motor skills. But Julian had swapped those exact neural pathways with yours. He had taken your pristine, perfectly disciplined motor blueprint and left you with his physical body. The tremor wasn't inherent to the muscles themselves. It was a failure of the brain's signaling system. You closed your eyes and took a deep, measured breath, falling back into the intense mental conditioning you had practiced for over a decade in the quiet museum basement. You imagined holding a fragment of ancient brittle glass, focusing your entire consciousness on stabilizing your pulse, slowing your heart rate, and projecting absolute stillness into your extremities. When you opened your eyes and held your hands out in front of you, they were perfectly still. The physical body belonged to Julian, but the master control system belonged entirely to Arthur Vance. The years you spent restoring artifacts had trained your mind to command muscles with absolute precision, overriding the physical unfamiliarity of this new form. You stepped through the automatic doors into the blinding light of the operating room. The atmosphere was heavy with tension, the rhythmic, electronic clicking of the vitals monitor filling the silence. The surgical assistant handed you the scalpel, her eyes filled with absolute trust. You stepped up to the patient, looking down through the high-powered surgical microscope at the incredibly dense, complex web of nerves and blood vessels surrounding the brainstem. The medical knowledge wasn't in your head, but the raw anatomical map was displayed clearly on the high-definition guidance screens above the table, showing the exact illuminated path you needed to follow to clear the damaged tissue. The climax arrived in a single terrifying second. As you lowered the scalpel into the microscopic field, the sheer pressure of the situation crashed against your mental defenses. The monitor's steady beeping suddenly sounded like a ticking bomb, and a sharp, violent tremor rippled through your right wrist. The assistant gasped softly, noticing the sudden instability. You froze, the blade hovering a mere millimeter away from a major artery. One fraction of a millimeter in the wrong direction would cause an incurable hemorrhage. The choice was immediate and brutal. Pull back right now, admit defeat and destroy the child's life, or push through the terror and force your mind to master the flesh. You shut out the sounds of the room, the lights, the watching eyes, and the ghost of Julian's failure. You forced your mind back to the basement, remembering the feeling of stabilizing a collapsing artifact, relying entirely on the muscle memory of your soul rather than your eyes. You anchored your wrist against the surgical brace, exhaled slowly, and let your hyper-focused discipline take complete control. The tremor vanished, replaced by an unnatural, stony stillness. With agonizing slowness, you moved the blade along the illuminated path, executing the micro-dissection with a flawless, steady precision that left the entire room in breathless silence. Hours later, the heavy doors of the surgical ward swung closed behind you as you walked out into the quiet, dim hallway of the hospital. The senior nurse ran up to you, her eyes shining with tears of relief, announcing that the patient's vitals had completely stabilized and her prognosis was perfect. You nodded quietly, accepting her praise, and walked toward the large glass windows at the end of the corridor, watching the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the city. The conflict was resolved, but the reality of your new existence was absolute. You could never go back to the museum basement, and you could never reclaim the quiet, simple life of Arthur Vance. That man was gone, trapped in a broken body somewhere out there in the world, running from a debt he could never pay. You were Dr. Julian Vance now, an elite surgeon carrying the immense weight of a stolen identity, bound to a lifelong sacrifice of living a lie to protect the innocent. You looked down at your steady, unfamiliar hands, realizing that the only way to survive this trap was to become the savior the world thought you already were.